Okay, well, good evening, everyone. So thank you very much to Henry for those kind words of introduction and for inviting me to speak tonight on what hopefully we all agree is a very important topic about the challenges of the next energy revolution, some of the economic ideas underlying the thinking, and some of the current policy context. Henry said he will be strict with me on time, so you can give me 5-minute warning for half an hour. So I'm going to talk about the drivers for a new energy revolution, some of the economic understanding of industrial change that I draw on in the book, around ideas around energy dependence of economic growth and around the evolutionary dynamics and co-evolutionary dynamics of industrial change, some of the lessons from those past industrial revolutions and the key role of energy technologies, which of course have mostly been based on fossil fuels, in those past industrial revolutions which have led to surges of economic growth, and then look at briefly, and we can go on into the discussion about what that might tell us about some of the opportunities and challenges for a low-carbon industrial revolution, and going from aspirations to implementation. So next slide, thanks. So I think we agree we need a green industrial revolution, and we've had two important policy documents produced at the end of last year, and people in the audience have been closely involved in writing those. So we had the Clean Growth Strategy, which sets out the government's plans for achieving the next stage in reducing the UK's carbon emissions, on track for an 80% reduction by 2050 from 1990 levels, and the target, just hit a... Yeah, I might just need to wake it up from time to time. So the target of meeting a 57% reduction by the period 2028 to 2032 from 1990 levels. And clearly this becomes more and more challenging to achieve these deeper and deeper carbon reductions. So this requires looking at low carbon electricity, but also decarbonising heating and transport as well, and as well at the same time enhancing the energy efficiency of homes and businesses. And the Clean Growth Strategy aims to do that at the lowest possible net cost to UK taxpayers, consumers and businesses, whilst maximising the social and economic benefits to the UK from this transition. So that's quite a challenge to achieve that. And then the second document was the Industrial Strategy, which was came out in November last year, and that's focusing on transforming the UK economy to boost productivity and earning power. I think it's a very interesting and exciting document that it looks at these 5 foundations of productivity increase around ideas, people, infrastructure, business environment and places, and sets out these 4 grand challenges around the digital economy, artificial intelligence and data, around clean growth, so that's obviously linking with the Clean Growth Strategy, the future of mobility, which again will be around electric vehicles and around alternative ways of moving people and goods around, and the challenges of an ageing society. Next slide, thanks. And as the strategy explains, we've been doing well over this period from 1990 in what's known as decoupling. So decoupling economic growth, which has been increasing, obviously with the dip around the 2008-2009 recession, but that's over this period has increased. UK GDP has increased by 67% since 1990, and at the same time UK carbon emissions have gone down by 42%. So we've managed to grow the economy whilst reducing carbon emissions. So the question is, can we keep doing this? Can we keep growing the economy and reducing carbon emissions at the same time, and keep this decoupling on going forward. Next slide, please. So what are some of the trends that have been driving this decoupling, which is known as green growth, because you're achieving growth but reducing the emissions in the economy? So 3 big drivers. So one around decarbonising electricity, so electricity generation, so the switch from coal to gas-fired generation in the 1990s, because gas has much lower carbon emissions per unit of electricity generated. The expansion, which was largely driven by the privatisation and liberalisation of energy markets, the expansion of renewable electricity generation, up to now 25% of electricity generated from renewables, and this has largely been driven by policy measures, things like the renewables obligation, now the contract for difference feed-in tariff, which provide an incentive for generators to source renewable electricity generation, and nuclear power has also contributed to that because it's been a low carbon source, been stable over the last 20 years or so, around 20% of electricity from nuclear, but this will fall as older plants retire unless we decide to invest heavily in a new generation of nuclear power, and that has been slow to materialise. We may come back to in the discussion. Improvement in energy efficiency has also been a key driver of this decoupling. So average household energy consumption has actually fallen by 17% by 1990. Again, regulations about improving the efficiency of home devices has been a key driver for this. And then the move from manufacturing to a service economy. So emissions from business and industry have gone down by 47% as we move to a more service-based economy. So, and the 2 strategies say, we can keep doing this going forward, have a high growth, low carbon economy, and they point to the falling costs of renewables. Solar costs down 80% since 2008. The investment in energy efficiency and low carbon vehicles driving this economic growth, and the creation of green jobs, 430,000 green jobs. Next slide, thanks. And this is just a graph showing the reduction in costs of solar panels, solar PV modules. And again, arguably this has been driven partly by regulation in countries like Germany, which created a demand for solar power, and then manufacturing, particularly in China, where you have economies of scale, which have brought the unit costs of manufacturing solar panels down. So that combination of the demand pull and the technology's supply-side push. Next slide, thanks. So the question is, can this continue going forward? Can this rate of decoupling of economic growth and carbon emissions be maintained? So some people argue that there are limits to energy and material efficiency improvements. And again, we might come back to this in discussion. It depends a lot on whether you think there is a minimum level of energy and materials needed for each unit of economic output. And if you hypothesize that, then at some point these efficiency improvements start to slow down, and then if you have continuing economic growth, you don't get the continuing emissions reductions. They also point to the increasing financialisation of economic activity. So GDP is going up, but are people benefiting from that? Is more of that economic activity linked to financial speculation, for example, both in the markets and increasingly by many businesses who make a lot of their money from financial activities rather than more productive activities, and the outsourcing of production of goods. So if you look at the UK on a consumption basis, our carbon emissions linked to our consumption have been going down more slowly than our carbon emissions linked to production. So there's a question of whether those trends can be continued. And then, as I said, a lot of the gains have come from decarbonisation of electricity generation. which is the relatively easy part, because you don't notice the fact that 25% of your electricity now comes from renewables, because it's the same electricity that comes out of the socket in the wall. But further expansion of low carbon electricity generation may increase costs in the short term, even though it will be likely beneficial economically over the long term. It's starting to require more investment in smart grids to handle two-way power flows for more local distributed generation and to handle the intermittency, and with more investment in storage such as batteries and demand-side response, so you can the demand can respond and lower the peaks, so you need less investment in generation. And low carbon heating and transport are more disruptive of household and business energy use practices. People have to change the way they do things if you go from a gas boiler to electric heat pump, for example, and so that's more challenging. And then the other challenge is, can we expand the innovative capacity in the UK so the UK benefits from this, including entrepreneurship, management and skills needed to reap the benefits of the low carbon transition. So what I wanted to do in the book was to try to look back at past industrial revolutions, see what we can learn for a low carbon transition. So I argue that the scale of changes in technologies, institutions, business strategies, user practices needed for this new energy industrial revolution are of the same sort of scale as these past industrial revolutions. So the question is, can this low carbon transition deliver similar productivity gains and economic welfare benefits similar to those of past revolutions? So what can we learn from these past system changes? What approaches have been used to understand this, and particularly what the role of energy provision has been in these past waves of economic growth. So next slide, please. And again, probably all know this, but why is this? I argue this requires need for new economic thinking. So first of all, why do we need high rates of economic growth? Why is that the organising principle of the economy at the moment? Two main reasons. It's understood as being linked to the creation of jobs, and it enhances, maintains tax revenues to the government, which can then be used for public spending on health and education and other good uses, without having to raise taxes on higher earners, for example. So say the challenges is maintaining green growth consistent with the sustainability transition, or does it require a more radical transformation of current economic systems? And in the book I draw on these two more alternative strands of economic thinking, even though they both have long academic histories of thinking. On ecological economics, the idea that looking at the dependence of the economy on energy and material flows to and from natural ecosystems, and evolutionary economics, which looks at how economies evolve over time through processes of innovation and dynamic interaction between technological and social elements. So the ecological economic view of the economy sees the economy as a subsystem of the natural ecosystems. So it relies on flows of energy and matter coming into the economy, and it creates waste which go back into the economy, back into the ecosystem, which then need to be assimilated. And of course, CO2, carbon emissions, are an example of that. And so arguably the challenge of climate change is the limits of the ability of the atmosphere to absorb and assimilate the levels of carbon dioxide that we're producing from economic activity. And as economic activity grows, obviously up to now those CO2 emissions have been growing. Next slide, thanks. And this has obviously been developed into more detailed models. So looking at the economic system and looking at this key role of what's sometimes called exergy, which is the part of energy which provides useful work. So it can be used to move move machines, power machines, provide electricity. So the exergy is the component of energy which provides that useful work. So increasing sources of energy, exergy from fossil fuels, and the improvements in efficiency of conversion to that to provide this useful work have been two key drivers of economic growth, combining obviously with labour and capital inputs into the economy. So economic growth from this perspective, and this is work by Bob Ayres and Benjamin Waugh, is seen as a sort of positive feedback process with two key drivers. So one is the substitution of energy-using machines for labour and capital. So going back to the steam engine, as we'll talk about in a minute, and electrification and oil and so on, which enable essentially energy to be substituted for labour and capital, which reduces the costs of goods and services produced, which then leads to increasing demand. And then the other driver is the application of knowledge to improve the efficiency of these conversion processes, along with inputs of labour and capital, so that again leads to product and process innovation, which reduces costs and stimulates increased demand. So these sort of positive feedback processes, particularly involving substituting energy for labour and capital and improving efficiency, have arguably been key drivers of these past waves of economic growth. And then the other strand of thinking, as I said, is evolutionary economics, particularly co-evolutionary economics. So some of you will know the work of Eric Beinocker in his 2006 book on the origin of wealth, building on the work of Richard Nelson and others, seeing economies as complex adaptive systems. So the economic growth results from a co-evolution of technologies, institutions and business strategies. Again, there's sort of these positive feedbacks to adoption which drive economic growth. And this was developed into quite a detailed model by Colter Perez, who again formerly at SPRU and still is linked to SPRU at Sussex, where I am, in a 2002 book. And she looked at these 5 surges of economic growth, starting with the Industrial Revolution, starting in the 1700s. And she argued that each of these surges were driven by a key technological organisational innovation, which becomes cheap and then creates spillovers to new uses and new technologies. But finance plays a key part as well. So in the initial deployment phase, there's speculative financial investment, which leads to a bubble, and then often a crash, and then a more productive phase of investment, which is associated with these periods of high economic growth. But crucially, the full benefits of these technological organisational innovations are only realised when the institutions, the rule systems, the legal frameworks and the practices co-evolve to match the technological and organisational changes. And in work Colter Perez did with Mariana Mazzucato at Sussex, they argued that green technologies could be seen as the new direction for implementing the current surge based on information communication technology. So I'll come back to that as we go on. So in my work, I've tried to combine these two perspectives, the ecological and the evolutionary perspective. So looking at how technologies, institutions and business strategies co-evolve with natural ecosystems and also with user practices, so how the use of these technologies have changed over time. So in Colter Perez's work, I say she identifies these 5 surges: the first industrial revolution, then the age of steam and railways, the age of steel and heavy engineering, the age of oil and mass production, and the ICT age that we're now in at the moment. And I say you get these speculative phases, so canal mania, railway mania, a turning point, and then a sort of golden age, as they're often called, of high economic growth. And then, as I say, I applied this particularly looking at the role of energy technologies in these waves and surges. And one of the things you notice is the sort of prehistory, the length of time some of these technological revolutions, which we think of as occurring in a short period, took a long period of time to realise. So there was steam power, first used in 1712 to pump water out of mines. The steam powered locomotive was pioneered in 1829, so over 100 years. As I said, then you've got this railway mania, this speculative investment in new railways in the 1830s and 1840s. But this second surge happened in the 1850s and 1860s, so the big productivity benefits were only seen when you got these synergies of stationary steam power, motive power for railways, and development of machine tools and complementary institutional innovations around factory working systems and joint stock companies. Thanks. Similarly, in the third stage, electrification, it took a long time from the initial deployment of, in 1882 in New York until the 1920s for economic benefits to show up in the productivity statistics. And similarly, the steel industry was again a key second driver of this third surge. The Bessemer process, particularly, which reduced the cost of steel rails from $107 per tonne in 1870 to $18 per tonne in 1898. And crucially, then steel was expanded to many other uses: shipbuilding, machine tools, construction, etc. So together, these meant a massive expansion of coal use for electricity generation and steel production, and led to a boom, the Roaring Twenties, until the Wall Street crash in 1929. Moving forward, so rapid skip through history, I'm afraid, to the fourth surge. Again, a sort of pre-war deployment phase with the start of mass production with the Model T plant in Ford Model T plant in 1908. But again, the full benefits realised in the deployment phase after the Second World War, and Perez argues that suburbanisation and active government policies help provide a direction for this deployment of the mass production paradigm to promote road building, house building. And then this led in the 1950s and 1960s to the rise of consumerism, where you had plentiful supplies of oil and coal, economies of scale in supply and demand, housing, leisure and natural devices, which obviously led to a significant increase in the standard of living for most households. And the expansion, the rapid expansion of oil use particularly, on top of the previous expansion of coal use, which also continued to expand for electricity generation. And this led to the sort of 2 or 3% annual rates of economic growth, and this is for the US. And just, I think it's helpful to see this sort of scale. And this is in real terms adjusted for inflation, how the size of the economy has grown since the 1900. So this exponential growth rate leads to doubling and tripling of the size of the economy. And I say now in the fifth surge, and what Mariana Carter and Carlos Perez argued, that green can provide a direction for realising the benefits of information communication technologies. It needs this investment in productive capital and institutional changes to realise the benefits, and they can be linked to smart systems, so linked to renewable energy technologies, but to wider changes around circular economy and smart cities, to link the benefits of the ICT revolution with green technologies. But there are clear challenges to achieving this. The dominance of neoliberal market thinking, the financialisation of economies, and relatively weak legitimacy for government intervention. So, in work that I did with 5 more minutes? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
5 more.
Okay, great.
You're doing very well.
So, in work in the book and drawing work we did with Peter Pearson, we looked at, are low carbon technologies yet ready to drive this new growth surge? So the insights from economic historians point to this role of the low cost of energy compared to high cost of wages, stimulating substitution of energy using machines for labour, and the institutions supporting the diffusion of knowledge for innovation and entrepreneurship. And this is sometimes classified in terms of general purpose technology such as the steam engine, electrification, mass production, which had these 3 properties: the capacity for continued innovation, stimulating a wide range of applications, and creating spillovers for complementary innovation. So we asked, do low carbon energy technologies have these features yet? Well, they have the first one. They have this capacity for continuing innovation, which has been leading to cost reductions, as we've seen, in terms of solar PV. But so far, they haven't yet created a wide range of applications. They've mainly been substituting for existing energy technologies. But more local generation, particularly in developing countries, can provide other economic and social benefits. And so far, low carbon energy technologies have created few spillovers, few complementary innovations, but potentially that can come through this combination of smart systems and low carbon. But on balance, we argue that it does require more systemic change from the current high production, high consumption economic model to a more low carbon energy, smart systems, circular economy model. And that is required to tackle these social and ecological challenges, so the low carbon transition, which we're familiar with, but achieving the 2 degree C target, which was agreed at the Paris Summit in 2015, requires, it's very stringent target to meet that. So it requires coordination, government action within and between countries, and massive reorientation of public and private investment towards low carbon technologies and green industries. And at the same time, we have to tackle challenges of social inequality. We've seen this decoupling of wages from productivity improvements, so that average wages haven't been going up and inequality has been increasing. And there's another challenge, the ecological challenge, what's known as declining net energy. We're getting less energy out from the energy that we invest in energy sources. So that's been seen in coal and oil, but so far renewables also have relatively low net energy values in terms of the net energy that's returned from the energy that's put in, because they're essentially more diffuse sources. And this is just showing that the work from St. Court colleagues in France, the declining energy return on energy invested of oil from a maximum of around 50 in the 1940s and 50s down to 20, so 20 units of energy for each unit of energy put in, and that's projected to go down much further in the future as we have to go to more and more difficult sources of oil to extract. Ingrid's going to talk much more about this, much more of an expert than I am, but we did some work on looking at the challenges of this reorientation of investment and some of the structural constraints in the current investment community, why it's not won't necessarily automatically respond to incentives. So renewable energy is seen as an immature sector to invest in. There's lack of liquidity in terms of long-term investments in renewable energy. You might think that pension funds would want to invest in infrastructure and renewable energy for the long term, but there are short-term drivers on fund managers to deliver returns in the short term, and there's so far lack of secondary market vehicles for selling on initial investments which are necessary for well-functioning markets. So one of the aspects of the system change we need is change in the investment community, which I think Ingrid's going to say much more about. So I think where does that leave us? It leaves us challenges for economic analysis because there's no theoretical model which fully accounts for these roles of exergy efficiency, technical economic surges, and a return on investment in economic growth. We can obviously learn from current partial models, but we need new economic models that do this. The mainstream models of endogenous economic growth don't account for energy inputs, and I think this is a major drawback of these models. They do put emphasis on human capital, skills and knowledge development, which we've seen is also very important, but can these models be linked with energy-dependent models of economic growth? The models are out there. Some models starting to be developed using energy-augmented production functions. For the economists in the audience, I think there's doubts about the extent to which production function models, which are sort of linear models of output as a function of input, can really capture these dynamic interactions and the evolutionary changes that we've seen. And of course, we've got to do this very quickly. Climate change mitigation requires urgent action to achieve the targets. So going forward, as I say, I think that the clean growth strategy and industrial strategy are a very good step forward. Green growth is the only politically feasible strategy in the short term, and we need a redirection of investment towards low carbon green technologies. And this can, I think, deliver a new surge of economic growth. It needs strong government action and reform of financial systems to achieve it. It needs putting a price on carbon emissions, ideally through a tax and dividend system. But I would argue that at the same time as this, we need to look at more fundamental changes to the economic model. Things like moving away from GDP as the proxy measure of social welfare, looking to a wider range of indicators of well-being, looking at institutional changes to promote long-term patient investment, looking at investment in redesigning cities to be smart, low carbon and livable, and looking at consumption as well, and looking at reducing wasteful consumption by smart circular economy ideas. I would argue that this is still a positive narrative, and if we focus on improving well-being and the spread of technologically driven productivity benefits to all. So I'll leave it there. Thanks very much.